Hey guys, what up? It's Jack, and welcome back to another video. Now, I just want to apologize ahead of time that I apologize for the editing. There's gonna be some lobby waiting times in between some of the footage over here, but I didn't have much time to put into editing, so I wanted to get this out because Activision Blizzard is going to be acquired by Microsoft. The courts have basically given the green light, and it is a big day. And I wanted to basically talk about this a little bit more in depth. So this commentary, I'm going to try to make this commentary not as long as possible and get all the important stuff out in one commentary. So here we go. Let's get right into it. So a lot of people are wondering, like, a lot of people are optimistic, and yet at the same time, a lot of people are skeptical. And why they're skeptical is, and they have a right to be, right? Because they're like, hey, look at what Microsoft has done to Halo. Look at what they've done to their own franchise. So, and they're absolutely right. But at the same time, I also have to say, well, yes, but look at what they've done with Halo. And I know some of you guys are saying, well, what do you mean? Well, the Master Chief Collection to this day is still getting love and updates, including one that they did a few days ago, and they're also getting like it's getting legitimately optimized and love to this day. They're doing a great job with games, with a package of games that are basically like very old at this point, kind of like old Call of Duties. So I'm thinking to myself, well, if the old Call of Duty games were to get that same kind of love, whether they release an Infinity Ward collection or a Treyarch collection or not, I think that that concept is something that is very lucrative, because a lot of Call of Duty players, and as a former dedicated Call of Duty player myself, right, or should I say a COD refugee right now in terms of my status in that aspect, I would say that yes, absolutely. A lot of players basically cycle between Call of Duties, right? Even when a new Call of Duty releases, what do? You play it for a while, but you always go back and play the other ones as well, right? Because of what those other Call of Duties offer. And then once you had enough of that, you go back to the new Call of Duty, or you'll just keep cycling and you go to another one, right? So giving those old games that kind of love or whatnot is very lucrative, and getting those player counts up in a subscription service like Game Pass actually makes those old games profitable. So player count is what does it, and that's one way right there in terms of how you get players, to play the game. But of course, a lot of you guys were talking about microtransactions, and yes, you're right, it is certainly possible, especially now since all these franchises are going to be under one house. You're obviously going to see things like a Halo, Call of Duty crossover and stuff like that, which is obviously awesome, as well as other crossovers with other games as well, which is again obviously awesome. But with that being said, as long as the microtransactions are cosmetic only, I'm perfectly fine with it. As long as it's not play to win, I'm fine with it. And you can certainly expect things like that. And you guys are right. Some of you guys have been speaking to me in the comment sections, and you're right in terms of the microtransactions. But and the thing is, just before this acquisition went through, it was like a few months prior to where Redfall, excuse me, to where Redfall kind of failed with Microsoft, right? It just launched completely unfinished. So Microsoft now knows the hard way, in terms of like, listen, we can't just acquire these guys and basically just let them do their own thing, so to speak, right? You can't just not have supervision about it, right? You gotta make sure that people kind of stick to their strengths to a certain degree or whatnot. I mean, they're all about creativity. Microsoft and Phil Spencer himself have mentioned that. They're all about creativity and letting creators create. And I agree with that, and I see that. But to a certain extent, you also got to make sure that the developers also make what they're known for in the first place, right? You can't have Treyarch make something completely different, right? I mean, if you go back to pre-Black Ops 4 release, it was going to be something completely different. But then once they got pros to come in and play the game, they basically said, what are you guys doing? This is not Call of Duty. So they kind of had to hit the stop button. They had to go reverse and make it into what we got with Black Ops 4. So so you guys can understand, that's something that Microsoft has recently learned. And now with this acquisition, they can't afford, more than ever, they can't afford to be looking bad, right? Because they've purchased all these guys, and they know that they can't just like sit back and be like, yep, we're going to release all these games on Game Pass, and we're just going to let things fly. It's like, no, they can't do that. They know that they can't do that. And they know that they would be profiting even more if they were to actually do a few things, because whether you agree with me or not, the fact is that Microsoft actually knows Call of Duty. Because remember, before 2015, when Sony got like the specific exclusivities for a temporary period of time, for their side of the fence in 2015 up and through the upcoming 2024, it was Microsoft that was there first. So these guys know Call of Duty. They know about the history of Call of Duty and all that stuff. So it's nothing new to them. So ultimately, there's there's knowledge there, so they know what they can and cannot do. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a good thing because it's going to this deal is a good thing because it's going to force the competition to get better. Because ultimately, obviously, the Microsoft's boss, Phil Spencer's boss, basically said that if it was up to him, that exclusivities, console exclusivities, wouldn't even be a thing. And I can't help but actually smile to that and agree with it. But at the same time, it's like, okay, well, what if, obviously, play games like multiplayer games like Halo or Gears of War and stuff like that, games that are co-op or multiplayer, I think everybody should have access to them regardless of where they came from. Whether it's it doesn't matter. If it's a co-op game, I think all the players that play whatever platform they play on for whatever reason, I think that every player should at least have access to it and be able to play together with other people and all that kind of stuff. So at this point in time, obviously, if you have a single player game that releases for a certain platform exclusively, well, I think we're one step closer now for that being a temporary exclusive, right? Let that game make its money for the first, few months or whatever it is, and then once it's maximized profits from that and it's not getting that much profit anymore, well, then you release it to everybody. It's still within a lucrative period of time, and it's like now you're going to be getting even more profits, right? You'll get 70% instead of 100 because it's going to be released on multi-platforms or however the percentage works, but you're still getting 70% of something versus 0 of nothing, or like, let's say 30% in terms of what you used to get, because the numbers are not what they used to because the game's been out for a while and everybody that's going to buy it has already bought it. So things like that, and the fact that it's going to force Nintendo and Sony to get even better or create their own system that would make things more consumer friendly, because this is a good thing, because ultimately, obviously, we know that Sony and Nintendo are good at what they do. Nintendo's in first place, Sony's in second, Microsoft's third. We know that Sony and Nintendo are really good at what they do. So it's like, okay, well, what if all of a sudden now that they're having less of a choice and their hand is to a certain extent being forced, it's like, well, now what if they actually were to do something like that is actually consumer friendly, right? Because that's one of the things that makes Game Pass so appealing to so many players and so many people, is like, it's a great deal, right? It's a great deal. It's financially sustainable. It's a great deal, and it's good. It's good for the games. It's good for everything. It's like, you can't go wrong with it. Now, we do know for a fact that the newer Call of Duty games are not going to be made exclusive. That they're not going to be made exclusive, but they're not going to go on Game Pass on day one. That we do know, right? But what we don't know is what's going to happen like afterwards or whatnot. And now, obviously, it's already, like, in terms of exclusivity with Call of Duty, that's just never going to happen. Nintendo obviously has been given the deal as well, and they've already signed that they're all about receiving Call of Duty on their platform as well. So this is something that is obviously great. It's going to help get the game to that other level. And the more, again, like I said before, the more people play the game, the better. And ultimately, that is what makes a game go from A to B, and that's what makes progress happen. So ultimately, at this point, it's exciting. Whichever way you look at it, it's actually exciting for every single developer out there, and not just developers, but also for the companies as well, because we're going to be getting like a lot of different, how do I put this? We're going to be getting a lot of different stuff that's coming up, like with whatever Sony decides to do or whatever Nintendo decides to do in the near future. We've got a lot of potential good things coming up, and you know what? I'm glad for it, because I'm not really biased towards any of the companies, actually. The only thing is I just pay attention to what's more consumer friendly, right? So that's one thing that Microsoft has over its competitors with Game Pass. And as a matter of fact, it was Microsoft's failure to the fact that they couldn't compete with Sony and Nintendo at their own game, right? Or that forced them to get better, right? And to create ultimately Game Pass, which is something that's been keeping them relevant. Game Pass itself has been something that's keeping Microsoft relevant, because for them it's been a very big struggle. So now that it's not a big struggle, and now that it's with this acquisition, they can reach their full potential, and at least in theory, right? And we hope they do, because if they do, ultimately what's going to happen is all these other games and all these other companies are going to reach their full potential, and you're going to have like amazing crossovers and stuff like that. I mean, seriously, it is a good time to be a gamer. I think there's a lot of good that can come from this. And I think exclusives are not going to be as how do I put this? They're not going to be as, I don't want to say as viable, but they're not. It's going to be, we're one step closer for exclusives, or at least permanent exclusives being a thing of the past, which is great because there are a lot of people that, you know, they'll buy a certain console for reasons of their own, which is great. Obviously, because competition is the thing that must remain. But despite all that, there needs to be something that will give, you know, all gamers access to all games. And like I stated previously, if it's a co-op game or a multiplayer game, guess what? If it's a co-op game or a multiplayer game, what's going to happen ultimately is that uh, that I think that if those games become non-exclusive, that it's a big win, right? I think Sony should, and Nintendo should have access to Halo and Gears and stuff like that. I really do. And even if it's not right away, they can make it to where like a few months later they do get access, or like let's say they get access to, like from launch they get access to multiplayer, but it's like, hey, you want to play a single player? It's like you're gonna have to wait a few months or something like that, right? I mean, it's better than not giving them access at all, right? Let these people experience the game the way it's meant to be experienced. So, and again, this is, again, if it was up to me, I'd be like, you know, give them everything, give everybody everything, and then obviously the guys that created it, for the companies that they work for or that are owned by them, or you know, or that own them, they get the maximum profits, obviously, and then the other guys get, you know, less of a profit. But at the same time, it's, I mean, it's how third parties work, right? I mean, it's simple as that. So I, for one, am very excited about it. I think in terms of where we could go with this is absolutely a great thing for consumers. I think it's a great thing for gaming. I think it's going to force Nintendo and Sony to up their game, which is terrific. And personally speaking, you know, I can't wait what they do. I'm very excited to see what they do, because Nintendo, again, I've been saying it for a long time. I grew up playing Nintendo, right? You guys know this, right? Nintendo was like the most I played. I mean, despite the fact that I own multiple consoles, the consoles that I probably played the most overall, like especially during my childhood, was Nintendo, right? So it's like, well, with all these different games and franchises I grew up playing, it's like if they release some sort of subscription service, right, or something of that nature, to where it's like, okay, now that we've got this going on, it's like, well, what if they release something that's consumer friendly for the product, for the franchises that they have, and then all of a sudden, guess what? It's gonna make people stay with them. It's not gonna make them jump ship or anything like that. And to top it all off, it's like it makes them better, right? It's gonna be really interesting to see how things turn out. You know, again, in my fantasy, like full-on exclusives or permanent exclusives would be a thing of the past. But whether or not that's going to happen, you know, beats me. I don't know. I'm also speaking out of, you know, kind of out of fantasy here as well. So ultimately, it's a good thing. Ultimately, it's a good thing that these games and franchises that are under the Activision Blizzard catalog are going to be on Game Pass. It's going to be a really great deal for everybody. And again, Call of Duty is not going to be exclusive, which is great. Obviously, they'd be shooting themselves in the foot by doing that. But you guys understand. You guys get it. Ultimately, potential is up there. And I really want to see what Microsoft does. And hopefully, they get it to a point to where things are going to be better. Now, obviously, one other thing that's pretty much guaranteed with Call of Duty is that the work environment is going to be better, right? The work environment is going to be better. So that's something that we could certainly expect. So it's certainly something that we can all look forward to, because if the work environment is better, then therefore that makes for a potential better game. So again, we can't expect too much change in terms of the newer Call of Duties until 2024 or slightly after 2024, because of the fact that, you know, the Sony contract thing is still going to be honored, which is something that they mentioned. But in terms of all the older Call of Duty games and such, I mean, they're all free game, and those are a lot of games, right? From the classic GOATs all the way to what we've been getting recently. So I would love for them to be fixed, especially the old ones. I would love for them to be safe to play. And at the same time, I would love for them to be more consumer friendly. So again, with an Infinity Ward collection or a Treyarch collection, I think the potential is really high up there. But again, just like everything else, it's going to take time. Nothing really happens overnight. But again, the potential is there. And we are one big step closer in order to making something like that happen, which is awesome. So, so yeah, that's how I feel. I want to know down in the comment section what you guys feel. Are you guys for this? Are you guys against this? What do you guys see? Is there something that I missed, something that I didn't talk about? Because again, there's always something that I do miss or something that I don't think of. And again, it is my point of view, so please, if you would be so kind, share with me your point of view. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch and or listen. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.